When you turn the TV off.
All right, everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome to our August community workshop. Today's presentation is on the topic of substance use disorders in the military population, and it will be presented by Shaka McDonald, who's our Veterans and Military Families Navigator. And of course, right now, everyone in my home is deciding to make noise, so I apologize if you hear anything in the background. I hope everyone can hear me well. Just to go over a couple housekeeping things today. If you are here for CEUs, make sure you are attending the entire time, as well as at the end of the training today, completing the evaluation. We'll put the evaluation in the chat at the end. Please, please, please make sure you let us know if it is working or not. It will close tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. If you are having any issues, please email me. We are able to help reopen it and things like that if there's issues. But please try to complete that tonight right after the training. We try to stay on to make sure we can troubleshoot any issues if you are having them. Um, During this time because it's only an hour and a half, we will not be taking any breaks. So if you do need to use the restroom or things of that nature, please feel free to do so. Please just don't take us with you into the restroom. um, we will use the chat function as well as taking yourself off mute for questions or comments. So please feel free. Kaylee and I will be monitoring the chat while Shaka is doing the presentation. That way he can focus on giving us all the great information here. And we will help make sure to coordinate the questions and comments that come along. So, with that being said, I'm going to introduce our presenter today. Shaka McDonald is the MDHHS, Oakland Community Health Network Veterans and Military Families Navigator for Oakland County. His position entails linking veterans and their family members to appropriate resources in the community from local, state, or federal perspectives. As a navigator, he assists current and former service members regardless of their discharge status, time in service, or era served. Shaka is also a nationally certified mental health first aid instructor. He is a son, excuse, he is a son of Marine veteran and nephew to Army veterans. Shaka has an intensive history working with and providing services to veterans, either in case management roles or as a navigator. He's a graduate of leadership. He's a graduate of the Leadership Oakland's class of 2023 and a member of Southfield's Veterans Commission. So, with that being said, I'm going to turn my camera off, but I encourage you all to turn it on as we sit back and have our presentation today. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Appreciate definitely the introduction. Good evening, everyone. I'm glad everyone can join us this evening. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible. So as Anna was stating, so we jump right into it, so we can have enough time for the evening. Like I said, Chuck McDonald, I'm the Veteran Navigator of Oakland County, part of our larger coalition of the Walking with Warrior Veteran Navigator Project that's out of Lansing. So under MDHHS, so our Walking with Warrior program represents the UP from Houghton Lake, or nah, I guess that's far UP. I mean, so many. That's just like a whole nother part of the nation there. So, but we have our navigator program represents the UP down to 8 Mile Road, if I can say it like that. So, excuse me, down in Monroe County. Lord, why am I just? So pretty much our Walker Warrior Veteran Navigator program represents the entire state of Michigan. There is a Veterans Navigator embedded within, I want to say, the various PIHPs throughout the state of Michigan. So we can get you that information if you need that. So as we go forward here, we're going to do a dive into what SUD is, and how historically it has affected our military communities throughout the world, and kind of just do a deeper dive on what and why that is. So I wanted to start by doing a definition of substance use disorders, which is a treatable mental disorder that affects a person's brain and behavior, leading to their inability to control their use of substances like legal or illegal drugs, alcohol, or medications. Symptoms can be moderate to severe, with addiction being the most severe form of SUD. Okay, which I'm sure many of you who work in the clinical space see addiction being one of the most severe forms of substance use. More than 1 in 10 veterans have been diagnosed with a substance use disorder, slightly higher than the general population. So folks will see that and immediately jump into, well, yeah, I assume that, etc. But there's reasonings behind that. So let's dive further into this here. So if we look at the history of substance use in the military, it's nothing new. Nothing new. The ancient Greeks and Romans indulged in a drink called pasca, which was a drink made by mixing sour wine and water and flavored herbs. It became an everyday drink for the Roman army and into the Byzantine period. So you're going back thousands of years. So I wanted to put that in there because every folks, a lot of folks may think, well, this is something unique to our current, Iraq, Afghanistan veterans, even Desert Storm, or even Vietnam. Nope, goes back a few thousand years, And so in the 18th century as well, British soldiers were given rum so they wouldn't mutiny. So now you got an established military, the British Army, that would give their soldiers rum so they wouldn't, decide to mutiny and turn against their higher ups. So, okay, that's Britain there. During the Civil War, whiskey was given to wounded soldiers as a stimulant. So now we're getting into the Civil War, 19th century. So now you get into that Civil War where you see that alcohol was even given to soldiers to stimulate them, okay, if they were wounded. During World War II, Russian soldiers were given vodka. Even the Russian pilots were encouraged to drink. So now you talk about a pilot that was encouraged to drink, and now you're flying a fighter plane, things like that. Which today, if we looked at our Air Force and we even thought the hint of alcohol was given to any of those pilots, we would be, up in arms as we should. More than 1/4 of Vietnam vets use heroin or cocaine while in service. And I'm going to do a deeper dive into our Vietnam veterans, where I still feel many of them have been left in the cold. Um, that war, many of our Vietnam veterans are still recuperating from that time in service. Just even today, and it's sad because many of those gentlemen are in their late 70s, mid to late 70s. And even today, I was looking on a national website, just happened to go on a VA website that is discussing benefits and things like that. And there was a few of the guys posted their age and they're 75 years old, et cetera, Vietnam, saying they're having the hardest time accessing their benefits and things like that. So my heart kind of broke for those guys. And I put some comments in this national, whatever it is, site to encourage these guys on what to do, what I tell the veterans and military families to do here in Oakland County in Michigan. So, even at, 50 some odd years later, you still got our men and women that are struggling to get benefits due them from their time in service in Vietnam, which is a shame, which really, really is a shame, actually. Um, when you look at using the utilization of heroin and cocaine, most opiates come from that part of the world. So you're talking about Asia, East Asia, and South Asia. So it was right there readily available. And then you're talking about 17-year-old kids being dropped off into the middle of a jungle um, just, a few days before, probably just completed boot camp, and then they get dropped off into on foreign soil to fight an enemy that they can't see most of the time. So how do you deal with that? So how to go out on patrol, things like that. You're stimulated via heroin, cocaine, marijuana, etc. So those are some of the things with that. As far as prevalence, alcohol prevalence among active duty soldiers. So 67% of male active duty military compared to 38% of civilian men drink alcohol. Well, some folks might say, well, there you go. These guys are just drinking, things like that. But we just looked at an historical account of where alcohol and military has all, excuse me, alcohol or any other stimulant, cigarettes, etc., has always been kind of embedded in our military culture throughout the world. And I'm sure many of you can probably understand why that is, because they're seeing the worst of mankind. So how do you deal with those atrocities? Back then, how do folks deal with those kind of atrocities um, without, how do they deal? Pretty much, how do you deal with seeing the worst of people, things like that, and just for that 1 year, however long you're on your tour of duty. 49% of female active duty compared to 16% of civilian women. So 49% of our female active duty soldiers consume alcohol at that rate. There is definitely a direct correlation between alcohol use and factors such as age of the service member, the service type, active deployment, combat exposure, mental health, and relationship status. So if we look at those there, people typically just look at our military members as just that. But we don't think about some folks have gotten in at 17 years old. So even psychologists have stated that the average male brain doesn't completely form until 25, 26, which may explain a few things. For a few folks, on here, you wonder, like, why is he? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, 25, 26. So now you got a young guy, 17, 18 years old, able to get alcohol at the PX on base, you know, ID check, yeah, whatever type of deal. Um, what kind of service type, what kind of service is this individual in? What are they doing? Okay. Are they infantry? Are they in a motor pool? Are they, whatever, etc.? Are they actively deployed or are they National Guard? Michigan here is a National Guard state. So, but at the height of the Iraq War, or even at the beginning of the Iraq-Afghanistan War back in 2000, 2001, well, when it kicked off, rather, I wouldn't say that was 01, 02, 01, many of the National Guardsmen were the first ones going in, along with the Marines and things like that. So a guardsman can be activated at any time. So you could be at work, etc. You get those orders to deploy, you got to go. So that's pretty much how that goes. Combat exposure. What kind of combat exposure did you have? I think about a gentleman that I worked with when in a previous role. I've been working with veterans in military families since about 2009. I've been in this role as a navigator since 2018. So, but been doing this really since 09. So, worked with veterans for about 15 years. And I remember I had a gentleman that was a Vietnam vet who, from his time in the service in Vietnam and being combat wounded over there, came home, started using LSD, and committed a homicide. But he started using while he was over there. He was shot over there. Um, he lost. He was out on patrol with one of his, out on with his platoon. They were out on patrol, came under enemy fire in Vietnam. Many of them were wiped out. He was left alive, but was severely wounded, and was laying amongst the bodies of his buddies that were battle buddies that were killed. So, and he didn't get found by an American patrol for about 2 days. So when he did get found by this American patrol, they pretty much found out that he was alive, fixed him up, took him back to base, rather, fixed him up, and said, "We're shooting you right back out to the front lines. We needed you." But by that time, you can expect that he had a mental break, laying amongst individuals that are deceased. The Viet Cong were walking around the bodies. This is before the Americans came and found him. So the Viet Cong were walking around walking around the bodies rather, and he played deceased along with his fellow comrades, and was not found till 2 days later. So you can see there was a psychotic break with that. And then so he punches out his first lieutenant once they get him back to base, and he finds out he's going to go back out to the jungle. Punches out his first lieutenant and gets an other than honorable discharge out of Vietnam. So they kick him out. Nah, he comes home and starts using LSD, and then commits a homicide and does 30 years in prison. So okay. Um, so combat exposure, mental health, and relationship status. So some folks being married, some
Hey,
folks being
Chaka.
divorced.
Can I just
Yes.
say one thing really quick? So we just had a comment for someone who's saying they're turning their camera off or not. I just want to say if anyone at this time, this can be a triggering topic. So that anytime you feel you do need to turn the camera off, you are more than welcome to. If you need to step away, we understand. I know many of us are here most likely either from individuals we serve being in the military, wanting to know the population, or I know for me, my brother's a veteran Navy SEAL. So this hits close to home. So if you ever feel the need for that, we understand, and it is more than okay to do so. Just stay logged in, just to make sure you get your CEs and come back once you feel you are ready to.
Thank you for that, Anna. Thank you. Yes, guys. Appreciate you giving that disclaimer, Anna. Yeah, anybody feels the need to kind of, turn the video off, etc. Do what you have to do. This is, like I said, a heavy topic, but hopefully can, add some enlightenment to what, why, and how in regards to this. Okay. Um, so heavy drinking has also been associated with military personnel based on rank. Like I said, once again, in age, single versus married, branch, deployments, having children versus not having them, person being a smoker, having a combat role, having a parent with a drink or drug problem. So that's where it's very important where you talk about adverse childhood experiences. I was even talking to a young Marine today who told me he joined the Marine Corps so he can escape his home life. So you get some folks that will leave to go to military service because they're trying to escape home life. And what they're doing is adding now compounded trauma if they join military and they have not resolved issues at home. So you'll see that a lot with some folks. So some other additional things could be uh, prior trauma prior to basic training. Like I said, childhood, sexual abuse, physical abuse. That's where that ACEs study really comes into play. So if any of you guys are clinical on here or not, I always try to implore um, the gentleman I even spoke with today. I implored him because he had some childhood trauma that when he goes and talks to his therapist about his military service, that he also brings up traumas that he's had while he was in his childhood. So you got some of that. So I would say if you're able to go and try to do a deeper dive to try to really get that person the healing that they need. Rates of alcohol have been perceived as the highest for those with combat specific jobs or those with a greater number or higher intensity deployments. So when you talk about guys and girls that had your job is infantry, your job is, for instance, special forces. Anna mentioned your job is a SEAL. SEALs are pretty much looked at when you start looking at guys at that level, the tip of the spear type of deal. Those guys, not everybody's becoming a SEAL. Not everybody's becoming an Army Ranger. Not everybody's becoming Delta Force. You get what I'm saying with that. My dad was Marine Recon, so not everybody can become a recon. So then it gets down to what your job is in the military, and then with that you're going to have more deployments, higher intensity deployments, more in number. Um, 1 in 3 service members were binge drinkers. We'll go into a deeper dive about that in just a moment here on why that is. Adverse combat experiences during deployment also have contributed to heavy drinking among military personnel. So, heavy drinking, of course, linked to personnel that were actively involved in the theater of war, regardless of the role, mechanics, cooks, supply, infantry, etc. So, a lot of times folks think when they think military, they're thinking everybody's boots on the ground. Everybody is, infantry and all that. Well, if everybody was infantry, who's working on the vehicles, right? Army has their combat engineers, right? These guys can build a bridge like out the blue type of stuff, right? So every job that you can find in the world, you can find in the United States military. So I remember one time speaking to a young lady at Common Ground. She was United States Army. She was a cook in the Army, and she was there to receive psychiatric help. And I interviewed her like, hey, what's going on, etc. And she was dealing with traumas that she experienced in Afghanistan. Her base came under fire. They call them forward operating bases. So pretty much, our military can set up a base in the middle of a desert, and that is now a FOB, forward operating base, right? So her FOB, her forward operating base, came under fire, and cook or not, you're dropping that spatula, so to speak. And she said she grabbed her weapon and had to engage the enemy. So regardless of whatever job you had in the military, they all get the same basic training first, and then you go into your specialized job, AIT, advanced infantry training. So you go in a little deeper training about your specific job, but everybody is trained to at the very bare basics to fight. So excessive drinking is prevalent among personnel who had instances of fearing for their lives or those treated in a hostile nature by civilians. So now you're talking about a couple situations there where you got U.S. Military over in foreign soil, and you don't know who to trust over there, right? So that's going back to World War I, to World War II, to Vietnam, to Korea, uh, to Iraq, Afghanistan. You're getting treated by, you don't know who's the enemy, who's friendly, who's not. So that can bring on some excessive drinking as well, because you don't know who's really an enemy combatant or not. Soldiers who had higher rates of exposure to the threat of death or injury were significantly more likely to screen positive for alcohol misuse. Exposure to atrocities increased the chance of misuse of alcohol and alcohol related behavioral problems. Okay. So exposure to atrocities increase the chance for the misuse of alcohol. All right. So, like I said, what we're looking at here is why. Why is alcohol or substance use a default we're finding for many of our military men and women? Well, how how else am I to deal with this trauma that I saw? So I was speaking to a young Army veteran. Like I said, I've been working with vets over 15 years, guys. So seen it, heard it, uh, as far as heard it, etc. Young gentleman he was a cook in Afghanistan, and they had to transport some supplies from one forward operating base to another one. He happened to join at the same time as a buddy of his that he went to high school with. Their convoy came under fire. And once again, this is a gentleman I met with at Oakland County Jail. I go to the jail as requested. If I get a request by one of the counselors there at the jail, case managers, and if they identify a veteran, I'll go into OCJ. I've worked in the prisons for years, Macomb Correctional. That's when I first started working with our military population. When I was in another job, I worked at Macomb Correctional. So my guys, were in prison, etc. The majority of the guys I work with, a lot of them were veterans, unfortunately. Um, but anyway, so this gentleman, they came under fire. His buddy, uh, their convoy came under fire. So naturally, they stopped the convoy. They returned fire to the enemy. And unfortunately, his buddy that he went to high school with was killed in a very, very graphic way, which I won't go into, but very graphically was killed. And so I asked the gentleman, he's still in jail. He was in jail for B&E in cars and stealing, and was had developed a drug habit, etc. I said, well, sir, when you got back to your base, when you guys got back to base, who did you talk to? Did you get a chance to talk to the psychiatrist, anything like that? He said, man, I sat down with the psychiatrist for about, I think he said 10, 15 minutes. And he pretty much was like, all right, man, going back to what you got to do. This is unfortunate, da da da. And I was pretty pretty appalled about that. But that he witnessed the death of a friend, a high school friend, and the extent of the counseling was very, very limited. So comes home, doesn't know necessarily how to process the grief and trauma that he had, starts drinking, etc., and just starts spiraling, got homeless, started breaking into cars, etc. Um, that was primarily because he fell through the cracks. That wasn't his fault. that was, I would say, the fault of, I would say, the Army to not better give him the treatment, etc., that he needed for seeing such an atrocity. So, needless to say, I want us to we're going to look at this video here that'll probably open up a little bit. The fault is a lack of treatment. Yep, the fault definitely is a lack of treatment, and you would like to think that that lack of that treatment would have started at the onset, excuse me, right after the conflict, because trauma untreated can lead to schizoaffective disorder, dissociative thinking, things like that. So studies have been done on that. Individuals that have had trauma that has not been dealt with, now it can lead to more psychosis and various things like that. So, but like I said, hopefully things are going to be, getting a little bit better here. Okay, this video may be a little triggering, so if, like I said, if you got to step away, please do so. I understand. You guys can hear that, right?
Yes.
when that's a lot to process there. Um, when I when I see that video there, that is when like I said, when I see that particular video there, and I'm trying to look at the chat there, to challenge to help men and women deal with the shame and guilt of killing others. So thank you, definitely. Um, I'm not taking a life, nothing like that. But I remember when I was in law enforcement having to carry a firearm, right? Um, that was something where you got a constant reminder that you're carrying a weapon that you might have to use, unholster and use, right? Um, when you see these individuals, they were clearing houses. When you talk about Vietnam and you talk about, World War II, Korea, you didn't have, sure, in some aspects, you had some house clearing. Maybe in Vietnam, some hut clearing, things, different things like that. It was a more jungle environment. These guys and girls are clearing, doing clearing homes like as a police officer. You go in and clear different rooms, things like that. You talk about a heightened sense of awareness. That's to the max, right? Um, then and the other thing is, this gentleman took a life in protection of his nation. How do you process that? And then, like I said, as we do a deeper dive, you can't go. He was a staff sergeant. I don't know, like I said, a couple of you guys are, are veterans. First sergeant, staff sergeant, they're almost deified. So, and he had 35, 45 guys underneath him. So if he showed any kind of cracks in his armor, so to speak, his psychological armor, his platoon, they could fall apart. So he has to keep this mindset of this toughness, etc. But you can look in his eyes and tell that he's going through some things. So that's where you got to look at it from the standpoint of we send our men and women off, but what are we doing when they come back? And it still needs to be a better process for these men and women when they come back. We still have not perfected that as of yet. So when we look at this here, the stresses of deployments, and then look at the fact that he supervised 35 to 45 people and can only get a job stocking shelves. That's an insult right there. Nothing against stocking shelves. I believe you got to shovel dirt, do whatever you got to do. But he showed that he had a managerial background, but still could not be trusted in doing anything but. So the stresses of deployments and the unique culture of the military offer both the risks and factors related to substance use among active duty personnel. Deployment is associated with smoking, unhealthy drinking, drug use, and risky behaviors. Once again, I'm processing this trauma and drama that I'm being exposed to. Zero tolerance policies, lack of confidentiality, mandatory random drug testing might deter drug use, may deter drug use, but also add to the stigma and can discourage many who need treatment from seeking it. Young Marine I just spoke to today, he got an other than honorable discharge because he dropped dirty, as they say. He used a drug while in the Marine Corps, and he said that was his first and only offense. He was going through some things psychologically while he was in the Corps, et cetera, and used the drug, dropped dirty once. He said he fought it for a year, and then after a year, they pulled him in and said, "We're kicking you out, and we're going to give you other than honorable discharge." So if I do have an issue with substance use, why would I go to a higher up and try to get help? You see what I'm saying? Because you're going to boot me out, and then I get an OTH or a dishonorable, and it's almost like I didn't serve because I can't get VA medical or anything like that. Service members can face a dishonorable discharge, even criminal prosecution for a positive drug test, which can discourage illicit drug use. So once active duty personnel leave the military, some protective influences are gone, and substance use and other mental health issues become of greater concern. Yep, they definitely need more mental health care. So additional risk factors are, factors that place our service member at risk of substance use include, age. Once again, I'm 17, 18, 19. My brain is even still forming. Who am I? That kind of deal, right? High demands in the line of service, military sexual trauma. I teach a class on military sexual trauma, and that is extremely prevalent, more prevalent among male veterans than even female, because obviously because the military is more heavily male dominated. But I've talked to individuals that have dealt with sexual trauma for 30, 40, 45 years. Never talked to anybody about it, but you can see how their behaviors, um, thank you, appreciate that. But you can see that their lack of getting treated for the sexual trauma has led to them having additional issues, substance use, and even bad relationships, etc. So 43% of active duty personnel indulged in binge drinking. Most of them were 17 to 25 years old. Male veterans with the 17 to 25, okay? Male veterans with a history of military sexual trauma reported 70% higher alcohol consumption, 86% more frequent heavy drinking, and a 45% higher alcohol abuse ratio compared to males who never experienced military sexual trauma. I know the VA screens for MST now, they screen. I would hope that any other behavioral health provider is screening for anybody that's served. Once again, there's been a national push to not ask the question, are you a veteran? But ask, have you ever served in the military? The reason why we want to change that vernacular of are you a veteran to have you ever served? Because if I didn't get a military sexual trauma, so not male, military, I'm sorry about speaking too quick here, military sexual trauma. So military sexual trauma is any kind of unwanted touching, intercourse, etc., pictures, touching, words that were traumatic, unwanted, unwarranted by that service member. It's been going on for decades, unfortunately, but now you're starting to get more treatment and things like that for it. But I would say if you're a human services individual that works with all folks and typically going to come across a veteran, don't ask, are you a veteran? If I didn't get that gentleman, that Marine I spoke to today, didn't get an honorable discharge. He got an other than honorable. Some folks may get medically discharged out. They don't feel like they're veterans. So they may not report that, yeah, I did serve in the military. So what you want to always ask is, have you ever served? Then after that question, I always ask any history of suicide, and I always ask about military sexual trauma. I don't care if it's a World War II veteran and they sometimes, oh, what's that kind of deal? To guys and girls that just got out, I ask about military sexual trauma, and you'll be surprised about the amount of guys and girls that said, yep, I did experience that. Nope, I never got treatment for that. Female service members who reported heavy drinking episode also reported experienced MST. So anyone that comes to your doors that served in the military, ask, have you ever served? And then also ask, have you ever experienced any military sexual trauma? So there's a higher prevalence of substance use after an incident of MST, potentially as a coping mechanism by the victim. So I don't know what just happened to me. Something that's precious to me, I feel was taken from me. So, but if I say something about it, then I could get railroaded out the military. Yep, that is a very, very common occurrence. Talked to quite a few veterans, predominantly female veterans, that did disclose that they were sexually assaulted and pretty much got discharged out of the military. There was a way that kind of found out a way to try to railroad them out of the military. So I might cope by drinking. Fighting the enemy in battle and witnessing the horrors of war predisposes serving personnel to the risks of problematic alcohol use. Service members who experience trauma or hospitalized during combat or at risk for increased drinking or drug use. Co-occurring diagnoses are also prevalent with SUD. Having a family member that was Vietnam came back with an issue with substance use. Because why? I went over at 17. You think about our Vietnam veterans that they were pretty much taught that if you don't go, it's jail or you just better go to Canada. There you go. So, how do I process that? I no longer have my freedom or I have to leave the country, etc. Or I need to just go ahead and answer my draft orders and get going here. Half of military personnel have reported that they believe seeking help for mental health issues would negatively affect their military career. Speak to anybody that did serve in the military. If I'm having nightmares, night terrors, etc., you're not disclosing that. Reason is because now you're non-deployable. So you can't be deployed. So if I can't be deployed, what do they have need of me for? Regardless if I was cook, mechanic, tank operator, whatever the situation is, now I'm non-deployable. So now I'm kind of broken, damaged goods, so to speak. So I'm not bringing up mental health. This is also prevalent for SUD issues as well. So if a veteran is deemed as non-deployable due to behavioral health concerns, their career could be over. They may begin a long, tedious process called med boarding. They can be medically discharged from the military. That med board process is quite lengthy. Once again, you start disclosing health issues, mental health, etc. They put you on that process of getting your med boarded out, and it's a long, tedious process. Once again, you're non-deployable, and they kind of make you feel like you're ostracized. These ramifications will deter self-disclosure. Now, going back to, well, wow, is this something that our current veterans are facing? Nope. Writings have been found originating from the Assyrian dynasty in Mesopotamia from 1300 to 609 BC, with the recordings of traumas suffered by soldiers who were called upon to fight every third year during their military service. Returning Roman soldiers would be bathed. Yes, definitely. That's why you can't ask for mental health help. Yeah. Um, Returning Roman soldiers would be bathed, purging them from the corruption of war. So going back, so we're talking about the Assyrian dynasty, Roman soldiers, a way for them to kind of cleanse themselves of the horrors of war. Because you think about back then, they didn't have guns; they were doing up close battle, right? They would be bathed. They would have these individuals, I'll say individuals, period, that would bathe them to purge them. Native American soldiers performed sweat lodge purification rituals in which the returning warriors would share their stories and sweat out their perceived inner pollution. So this is nothing new. So why we don't have stronger or better behavioral health intervention for our men and women once they get out is kind of beyond me, because this has been something going on for a few thousand years. So, but things are getting a little bit better. But once again, I just wanted to show you that these things have been happening for centuries. Those who experience trauma or were hospitalized or injured during combat are at risk for increased drinking or drug use. So veterans diagnosed with substance use disorders are 3 to 4 times more likely to receive a PTSD or depression diagnosis. Substance use with veterans is 5 times the amount of the civilian population. So, and some behaviors are learned while in the military. A lot of folks learn how to drink and do drugs while they were in. 30% of deaths or suicide are related to drug and alcohol use. And the other thing is 82 to 93% may have a co-occurring mental health issue as well. Once again, this co-occurring mental health issue is typically derived from undealt with trauma. If trauma goes unaddressed, it can lead to mental health challenges. So that's where that's coming from. World War I veterans had little to no support when they returned, and there were not enough jobs to support the mass exodus of veterans from the military. I think about you guys have the gentleman that created Winnie the Pooh. Like, I'm really taking you guys back, right? If you look that gentleman up, he was a World War I veteran and had many, many demons, so to speak, that he fought with psychologically from his time in the World War One in Britain. So that's one, famous case, so to speak, with this gentleman being a World War One veteran. And that was the gentleman that created Winnie the Pooh. World War II veterans had a better transition due to the lessons learned from the disastrous return of World War I veterans. So World War II veterans had more opportunities, GI Bill, home loans, etc. So the government looked at World War I vets and said, okay, we need to do better by these guys. But then it fell off when it came time for the Korean War. I don't know how they kind of dropped the ball with that, but those veterans were treated poorly when they returned home to the United States. They were largely ignored by the American public in sharp contrast, the appreciation and recognition displayed to our guys and girls that served in World War II. So it fell right back to the basis as the World War I vets. Vietnam veterans. So the individual rotation pattern utilized during the Vietnam War prevented soldiers from effectively working through their combat experiences before being thrust back into American society. Most soldiers in Vietnam were sent home alone after 1 year of duty, still wearing the jungle fatigues. Picture that. Within a 24 to 36-hour period, a combat soldier could be taken away from his buddies in the middle of a firefight and deposited into the chaos of an urban traffic jam with no accommodations to jet lag, much less the culture shock or readjustment to American life. Back then, now we can't fathom that. 36 hours, I was in the jungle of Vietnam. It was hot. I was getting eaten by mosquitoes. I was fighting an enemy that I could 75% of the time could not see. And I'm thrust back into American society. And at that time, they would spit on our soldiers, call them baby killer, etc. So you couldn't even, I've talked to Vietnam soldiers, said they took their uniforms off, stuffed them, and put on civilian clothes so they wouldn't be abused when they got off the plane. But wait, I was drafted to go to this war. I was forced to go there, and then I'm ostracized when I come home. How how could I not have some form of psychological adjustment issue when I have that form of rejection? And at that time, the VA was almost non-functional to a degree. I'll just say that non-functional here, pretty much, for our Vietnam vets. Almost half, 45% of Army enlisted men in 1970, 1971 tried narcotics. 34% tried heroin and 38% tried opium. It's grown right there. All right. The reasoning behind the drug use were stressful combat situations, self-medication, escape, and pleasure. Pure and simple. Here's a video, once again, that may be triggering. But it's showing video from our men and women that served in Vietnam. I'm gonna pause that there, stop that there. Those gentlemen there, 18, 19, 20, 21. You're, and I'm gonna just bring this to you because I had two uncles that served in Nam. Now, those in them, those your fathers, your uncles, those individuals who are now in their 70s, that was them. But picture dealing with that, and then you come home, you're getting spit on. Picture dealing with that kind of trauma, like they say with Hero. He's getting medevaced out. He's out of there. What do you think are the chances that Hero got some kind of therapy when he came back home? None. But then, but then we wondered why. Quite honestly, unfortunately, subsequent to the Vietnam War, the prisons filled up. Vietnam Veterans of America was birthed out of a prison. There were so many Vietnam veterans that ended up in incarceration when they came back. They created a Veteran Service Organization. I'm going to say, a gentleman told me VBA was created while in a prison because there was that many Vietnam vets. Okay. Now we want to look at, so once again, Hero, if he's still alive, is 75, 76. Those are folks' dads. That's your uncles. That's your whoever. Now they're in their 70s. Michigan's veteran population, the majority are 55 and up. And that of that 55 and up, majority are Vietnam era veterans. And they're still fighting for their benefits 50 some odd years later. All right. This is a testimonial of Vietnam veterans that are now the current age. They've aged, and they're going to talk about briefly some things they experienced. Second. So I spoke to a Vietnam veteran once again out at Common Ground. So if you de-age those guys, they were the 18 and 19 and 20-year olds that you saw in that video, right? They were the combat medics. They were the hero. They were blue. They were those guys. Um, and you can still see they are actively dealing with the trauma. The one gentleman saying that they threw trash on him when he came back home. Um, I was speaking to a Vietnam veteran who stated that he had a pistol on him, that he was waiting for the next person. If anybody assaulted him or said anything to him, once he got off the airplane in Nam, from Nam, he was ready to take a life. That was how serious that situation was. But so looking at this here, and as you heard those veterans say, the substance use was rampant. It was just there. So Among Vietnam veterans seeking treatment for PTSD, 60 to 80% have had alcohol use disorder. It's estimated that between 37 and 50% of Afghanistan and Iraq war veterans have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder, going back to the same reason why I said untreated trauma. Substance use disorders can appear as secondary to other mental health problems associated with stressors, such as post traumatic stress disorder and depression. Okay. 63% of Afghanistan and Iraq war veterans diagnosed with SUD also met the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. So we're seeing that correlation. All right, we're seeing a correlation of behavioral health and then substance use as well, or substance use and behavioral health. But the underlying issue can be that undiagnosed trauma. Veterans with a dual diagnosis, PTSD and substance use, are more likely to have an additional co-occurring psychiatric and medical conditions such as a seizure, liver disease from consumption of alcohol, schizophrenia, anxiety disorders, and bipolar disorders. So it's been documented that undiagnosed trauma can lead to schizoaffective and dissociative behaviors. Veterans who have experienced trauma or hospitalized or injured during combat or are at risk for increased drinking and drug use. So veterans with SUDs are 3 to 4 times more likely to receive a PTSD or depression diagnosis. So that's why we definitely have to address the substance use. Okay, we got to, okay, you're drinking a fifth a day. So I was talking to a young Marine who was at the point, he was a young Marine, did 4 years in the Marine Corps, straight out of high school, was up to almost a fifth a day, which is a heavy volume of alcohol. And he and I were talking, and my main goal was to get him into treatment. So I asked him what was going on. He said, man, I just can't relate anymore. I just, my friends don't understand me. I can't keep a girlfriend, etc. And I said, he said, man, I just can't relate. They're playing these video games, etc. And I just can't relate. I said, when'd you go? He said, well, I went in right out of high school. I did my 4 years in Marine Corps. He went in at 18, got out at, what is that, 21, 22, something like that. His mindset of what it meant to be a person was formed by United States Marine Corps. So I'm emphasizing that because they said the average male brain, going back to us guys, it doesn't complete formation to 25, 26, or the complete thought patterns, etc. Who he figured he was as a human, rather, was framed by the United States Marine Corps. No diss against the Marine Corps. My father's a very proud United States Marine, and I figure that's why I'm sitting here today, because him and my mom raising two boys in the city of Detroit during the time we were coming up, it took a Marine. I put it like that, right? But I needed to get this gentleman into treatment. So he said, I feel different. I said, well, you are different. Now, when we hear that word different here in society, it's a buzzword, it's a negative term. How could he not be different? And he went and fought and did something that they make video games out of. Call of Duty, he lived that, so to speak, in the Corps. And so I said, you are different. And he paused. And I said, but that's okay. That's expected that you're going to be different. So I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with you, drinking a fifth and sleeping next to your shotgun. He was doing that at the time, scaring his roommate, which you can probably, understand, sleeping with a, 12 gauge type of deal. But the main thing was manage to get him into one of our providers and get him the help, but not stripping him of his identity of the United States Marine Corps. My father's been out of the Corps for decades. If I were to tell him that he's not a Marine, he would find the strength at 80 years old and probably beat me up. He's a Marine through and through. But he celebrates that. I celebrate that. So that you can't to tell somebody you're no longer in the Army, you're no longer in the Air Force, that's part of their identity. That's not a negative thing. We just need to deal with the trauma that they may have experienced while they were in service. Never strip a service.
Once in the Army, always in the Army. Sorry.
There you go. There you go. And nothing at all wrong with that, right? I served in law enforcement briefly. I'm not going to strip that from me just because I'm not law enforcement now. Why? That's part of me. That helps me do my job type of deal, right? So yes, once in the Army, always in the Army. Once in the Navy, always kind of deal. So more than 9% of veterans reported that they experienced severe pain compared to only 6.4% of non-vets, putting them at higher risk for accidental opioid pain reliever overdoses. So I don't know, you guys heard the term rucking. Many of these men and women will carry rucksacks, for instance, that can weigh 40, 50, 60 pounds. And that does a lot to your joints, your lower lumbar, your back, etc. And you're going to be in some pain, which could introduce you to the various opioids, the pain relievers. The overall opioid overdose rates for veterans increased from 21% in 2016 from 14% in 2010. So pretty much went up 7% in 2016. So the overdose increases were mostly from heroin and synthetic opioids, not from opioids taken for pain relief. So a lot of guys and girls would self-medicate instead of going to get some help, you know, because I don't want to admit I have a problem, etc. Substance substance abuse, mental health are just disproportionately common in Marine Corps and Army when compared to other military branches. The reason may have to do more with culture than individual troops themselves. Marines self-reported the highest instance of binge drinking, alcohol dependence, and nicotine use, as well as the highest rates of depression, anxiety. If you talk to any Marine, they celebrate the fact that they were birthed out of a bar. So you have that mindset in 1775. Yes, they know the Marine Corps birthday. And I'm sure many of you guys may know the Marine Corps birthday. But unfortunately, that culture of alcoholism has been prevalent in the United States Marine Corps, also the Navy as well. Very prevalent in the Navy. The Army had the highest rates of prescription drug abuse and post-traumatic stress disorder, while the Air Force and Coast Guard reported the lowest prevalence. Okay, Marine Corps is some Marines don't like to acknowledge that, but it is a subshoot. It was birthed out of the Navy, so that's why you have Navy, Marine Corps, high alcohol use, and it's kind of a badge of honor. Who can consume the most, right, and still be standing or whatever. After adjustment, members from the Army, Marine Corps, and Navy exhibited 2 to 3 times the odds of multiple mental health conditions and substance use behaviors relative to the Air Force. So the reasoning behind are based on the individual branches and cultures that they were in. So each military branch has its own culture. So there are variations of military culture and the attitudes regarding substance use, as well as stigma and barriers related to behavioral health treatment seeking. So if I'm a Marine, I'm told, well, Army, Marine Corps, suck it up, buttercup. Deal with it. Take a Motrin for that. Get back to, your job type of deal. Culture and attitudes, particularly towards alcohol, tobacco use, have been found to vary across service branches. So the Marine Corps in particular has a more permissive forms of alcohol and tobacco use. 74% of Marine respondents, 69% of soldiers, was the Army, believe that military culture was supportive of drinking compared to 60% of Coast Guardsmen. Now, this is a quick video of a gentleman that he is now on the veteran side once he came back, and we're going to listen to his story briefly here. So for time's sake, um, I'm going to proceed forward because I'm going to look at a couple other things here before our time gets away from us. But I wanted to show that particular situation with that veteran. And it always pains me when I see when they show the pictures of the children and they showed, this happy young boy, when he was a kid. And you can even see he had joy while he was in the Army and coming home and having to process everything that he went through. And as we saw in the previous slides, for thousands of years, this has been an issue. But now we're in 2023. We need to have better behavioral health care for these men and women, regardless of the branch that they served in. It needs to be some form better help. So as we look at this, so the challenges of PTSD are enormous. 38% of soldiers report psychological symptoms. This young man stated that he took a life. I would assume the folks that's on this call never had the experience of having to take a life or carry a weapon to have to defend themselves, etc. So how do you process death? Having to do that, etc. We're going to look at moral injury just a second here. Psychological concerns significantly higher among those who repeated deployments. Why? Because my cortisol level, it never comes down. So I'm at a heightened, I'm never coming down. So that's that anxiety, etc. That cortisol, that adrenaline dump never is able to level off because I'm on repeated deployments, a heightened sense of awareness. And as you see here, 46% of veterans use alcohol to deal with PTSD, and moral injury can also resemble PTSD, but requires an additional treatment modality. Um, I don't know how many of you guys heard of moral injury before, but moral injury has been overshadowed by PTSD. It can look like PTSD, as it's stated here, so separate diagnosis from PTSD and may require a different treatment modality. It can occur when someone does or witnesses something that contradicts their moral beliefs. Thou shalt not kill, but I had to kill in honor of serving my country or to protect myself or my fellow comrades. It can be an act of omission. I didn't do something to stop that death, etc. It could be a betrayal of leadership or others in power or peers. So in Vietnam, you had a lot of what they call fragging, where you had soldiers that would frag, kill or injure their higher ups because the higher up may give them an order that soldier did not feel was going to be smart for the platoon. So they would frag them, as it's called. So they would feel betrayed by leadership. Moral injury is the distressing psychological, behavioral, social, and sometimes spiritual aftermath of exposure to such events. Exposure to traumatic events, a person can have a moral injury and PTSD and not meet the criteria for PTSD. You can't medicate, and I'm going to show you for all you guys that are clinical on here, you'll see on the DSM how moral injury can kind of look like PTSD. So you have the guilt, the shame, moral concerns. You see how it can blend over to intrusion and avoidance, loss of trust, difficulty forgiving, loss of meaning, self-condemnation, etc. Religious struggle. Does God still love me? Loss of religious faith. Once again, how am I, a good Christian and I had to do these types of things? So that's where when you look at the reliance on medication to treat moral injury, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And that's some of the main, the Marine I spoke to today, he said, and he's had some paranoid, some delusional thinking, etc. He said the first thing when he went to talk to a psychiatrist, he had to go 10 days to be psychiatrically evaluated for about 10 days. He said the first thing they did was offer him medication, not counseling, medication. And he said, Chaka, it made me feel drunk. Chaka, I didn't like it. He said, so all they did was change the dosage amount. I said, did they talk to you at any time? No, they just said that I had some issue. He stated that one of the doctors, when they found out that he was a Marine, because he went to a community-based provider, the doctor found out that he was a Marine. And unfortunately, the doctor happened to be of a different, he said that the doctor made a comment, well, do you mind taking the lives of foreigners? And I said, excuse me, he said that to you? He said, yeah, you know, as a psychiatrist, he said, do I mind taking the lives of foreigners, et cetera, whatever. So, and here, take this script. But if a person is dealing with more, so yeah, you just appalled at that kind of, how can someone that you trust your behavioral health to have these kinds of discriminatory thoughts, et cetera.
You know what? I'm gonna pipe up here
Go ahead.
because there is no need for that language to anybody. They have been through so much, and then you have somebody that comes in and says that. Wow,
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. I cleaned up my language.
I, I appreciate it. And that's why I want to give some time for folks to give any kind of commentary and things like that. But yes, I feel like how you were feeling, right? And so I would also implore you guys as well, if you're serving individuals that have served in the military in any capacity, not everything is PTSD. Moral injury hasn't gotten the exposure that it needs because you can't medicate it. Because moral injury is a wounding of the soul. It's that person's moral fabric that has now been tainted, or they feel it's tainted now. Law enforcement has it, EMTs, first responders. I didn't do enough to save that child, etc. So that could be a moral injury. It can look like PTSD, but really it needs a different type of therapy, and medication. It just doesn't work. It's going to be counseling. And we'll look at some aspects of counseling just a second here. So what can be done to improve? And once again, if that moral injury is not dealt with, it can lead to SUD as well. So as a community, we can do more to understand the military culture. So by you guys even attending this training today, and I'm sure with your other things that you've done, educating yourself on military culture. How many veterans does the state of Michigan have? We got 600,000, over 600,000. How many veterans does Oakland County have? We got 56,000 in Oakland County, 200, close to 250,000 in the Tri-County area. But you know what? Only 30% of those veterans use the VA. Only 30% of Michigan's veterans use VA exclusively. They're coming to you. Many do not disclose their military history because the question, hey, are you a vet? If I had a bad time in the military, no, I'm not a vet. I'm good. But have you ever served in the military? Yeah, I know our access unit has changed that vernacular. Ever since I know I came on here in 2018, we did a revamp of how we ask that question. So it's not, are you a vet? Have you served in the military? So, you know, gaining more understanding of military culture. Hopefully that video, the videos that showed you about the Vietnam vets gave you some insight to what your uncles, your dads, granddads, whoever went through. They were 18 at a time. I know they're 80 now, but they were 19, 20 years old and had to be a combat medic. And like, what do I do? You know, always screen for military service if you're in the human service field. Inquire about any substance use history prior and during and after military service. Just ask, you know, is drinking, oh yeah, we used to hit it hard in the barracks. Okay, ding, you know. Inquire about any trauma or adverse situation while in service that could have attributed to their addiction. Why? What happened? Refer to a treatment component that is proficient in dealing with trauma and addiction and proficiency with treating both. So unfortunately, you have some folks, they'll deal with the cocaine addiction, but why am I using that cocaine? Why am I using, even out in this, just civilian wise? Oh, you're a heroin addict. Well, why? What is some trauma that may have led to that? Treatment for veterans. So you got, I just threw up some different treatment modalities that, you know, you may see in play. You got the CAM, complementary and alternative medicine for PTSD, problem solving therapy, patients learning or reactivating problem solving skills. These are just a couple I just put in here. DBT, it's cognitive, you know, it's a form of CBT. The main goals are to teach people how to live in the moment, right? Develop healthy ways to cope with the stress and regulate their emotions and improve their relationship with others. Other psychodynamic approaches involve the interpretation of mental and emotional processes rather than just focusing on behavior. So there's different ways, and they also have spiritually integrated CBT, CPT rather. It has an acronym, spiritually integrated CPT, for those that are dealing with a moral injury. Okay, so basically, guys, I wanted to, I appreciate, everyone here coming to this presentation. Um, this was not to have a cloud of, gloom over our military, but that's why I wanted you to look at it from a historical. This is not a issue, United States issue. This is not a 21st century issue. This is something that's been going on for thousands of years. And there's been different ways that civilizations have tried to deal with their men and women that have served in whatever capacity in their militaries at that time. Bathing, rituals, etc. And now, 21st century, we have counseling, unfortunately, with a heavy prioritization, I believe, on medication. Veterans, they're not taking the medication. They're not taking that. They don't like feeling like zombies. That it's not helping. So we got to really get back to the form of counseling and things like that. Any questions for me? We got a few minutes for any questions that you guys may have, questions or comments that you may have. I've answered every question that there is.
No, you rock. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that. I'm just trying to spread the awareness. That's all I'm trying to do.
No, thank you so much. And I really appreciate, I worked with a client some years ago back at my other agency who had suffered with PTSD and went to Iraq, was deployed several times. I really appreciate how you've brought up the moral injury, just for even clients I work with today who have partners who've been veterans and have been struggling for a really long period of time, and how it affects their partners as well. And I think that's a huge part, that moral injury that you said, that isn't talked about. Wasn't even talked about years ago with supervision in my agency. It's not talked about in other continuing education, and it's we'll reference about veterans, or it will be talked about, but that doesn't come up. And I thought that was so insightful, and I'm really appreciative of the wording actually in that I haven't really been able to. And the military sexual trauma, more of just it just is, it brings it closer. And I just really appreciate some of the vocabulary that was introduced today. It was really helpful. And also it was sentimental, and it was very emotional, but I think that's really important for us to, if we ever going to work with people, to get the information in those videos to see it, especially if we haven't served. How you don't know. You don't know.
Leanne, you worded it perfectly.
Thank you. Well, thank you, all of you.
You're awesome.
Thank you.
I
Sorry.
Go ahead, Teresa.
I have PTSD. I'm just gonna open it up. I was in a very bad accident in 2008, 6 inches from a drunk driver. I would have been decapitated. Thank God I'm not. So when I relate, and I have military family as well. So I'm very lucky to be here and to be able to join you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa, for sharing. And thank you, Leanna, for what you stated, as well. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to all you guys, for joining this. Like I said, taking time out on your Wednesday evening, just to enlighten yourself, and like you said, like you're right, Leanna, the majority of folks haven't served in the military. So we don't. No, I didn't serve. I was that close from joining the Corps, but I didn't, but we can, get trainings, and so we can better understand the people that was, we're serving now, So yeah, I appreciate you guys coming to this, and just whatever you can take from this to help the clients that you are serving is awesome to me, right? That's That's awesome to me. So I appreciate the kind words. Appreciate you guys like taking time out.
All
this
right,
evening.
so it's Taco Tuesday on you next Tuesday because we missed dinner.
Yeah, with it. We're gonna get something to eat. I'll get you off the time to get something to eat.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Once again, thank you, Teresa, for sharing. And hopefully you're steady in recovery from the car accident, things like that.
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
Good. And guys, you see here we have this eval that you guys are gonna take a scan of or click on, and let us know how we can either improve some things or whatever. Feel free, put whatever in there.
So yeah, thank you everyone for all the comments and oops,